Okay, I think I'm about to go live. Okay. Let's mute people if you haven't been muted already. How do I do this? It is not okay. There we go. That's what I'm hearing. Okay, very good. Okay, welcome. Hope everybody's doing well. And this is a fundamental, very important parsha. All parshot are important, of course, but this particular one, Toldot, is fundamental to understanding the Jewish history, especially as it relates to Edom and to its progenitor Eisav, who was born in this week's parsha. Edom is very important in Jewish history because our longest galut by far, last 2,000 years or so, has been during the Roman Empire. And we'll learn a little bit about how to deal with them in Yaakov's behavior with his brother Eisav. Aside from all that, also this is the parsha where we have the little that we know of Yitzchak's life, considering that he is one of the avot, but probably the most mysterious one. We know so little about his behavior, his actions, how he led his life. And it's worth it to see the little bit that we can learn from how he behaves in this week's parsha. With that said, let's get straight into sharing the screen. We're going to figure out how to do that. Go share screen, and there we are. And we're going to get right into our sources. Yitzchak was married when he was 40, and he didn't have children for 20 years. For 20 years, he and his wife Rivka did not have children, and they pray. And after they pray, their prayers are answered, and they're able to have children. Of course, their twin sons, Yaakov and Eisav. Now, interesting wording, though, just to start us off here, for the Meshech Chachma, points out that there's a very interesting wording that's going on here. The pasuk says, Yitzchak Hashem, and Yitzchak prayed to Hashem, but Yetar is a powerful word, says Rav Hirsch. Like he pulled part of himself out of himself to talk to Hashem. He really stretched, really reached out to Hashem. L'nochach ishto, for his wife. Why? Kiakarahi, she was barren. V'yeter lo Hashem, and Hashem listened to him. V'tahar Rivka ishto, and then his wife Rivka was able to have a child. Now, the question is, if he is praying, he's not praying for marital harmony. He's not praying for peace in the home. He's not praying for them to find a good place to go out to eat. He's praying for children. That's probably what it should say. It should say that l'nochach, children. He's praying for the sake of having children, for banim, for the aldot, or something. But no, it doesn't say that. It says he's praying for his wife. So the Meshech Chachma wants to know why. So the underlined part over there says, so it says, Ki hu haya miftoach shaya lo zaro. He knew that he would have children. Why? Kamashama Hashem Yitbarach, Hashem himself promised Avraham. He said to him, you will be the father of nations. Your descendant, in other words, Yitzchak, is going to have children also. So he knew he was going to have children. But that doesn't mean Rivka would have children. Maybe Yitzchak would have children with another wife. Maybe Rivka would have a pelegish that you would give to him, just like Sarah gave Hagar to Avraham. Who knows? And Yitzchak wasn't sure how he was going to have the children. That's why when he prayed for his wife. because he wanted to have those children. He wanted to have these descendants from this amazing, wonderful woman that Rivka was. He wanted to have children from her. And that's why it says he prayed for his wife, because he wanted his wife to be the recipient of that blessing that he knew he already had. So that's the that underlined part over there from the Meshech Chochmah. Raki Taken Sheyulad Mi Isha Acheret. He thought maybe he was going to maybe have children from another wife. No, he wanted specifically from this tzedekit, from Rivka. All right, so that just gets us started with the parsha. Just to give you an idea of what kind of a person Yitzchak was, certainly what he thought of his relationship with his wife. Now we're going to get into something very controversial. This is just to tell you a little story around this perush. Just a little bit of a story from my life. Okay, I was in yeshiva in Or Sameach Monsey, a yeshiva that no longer exists, and when I was there back in 1996, I read this comment from Rav Hirsch in the older translation, and I asked one of the Rosh Yeshiva. There's two. Or Sameach Monsey had two Rosh Yeshiva. They're both alive. Baruch Hashem, Rabbi Rakowski and Rav Shor, Simcha Shor, whose father's commentary we're going to see later on tonight. So I asked Rabbi Rakowski how Rav Hirsch can say the seemingly audacious thing that we're going to see. He says on this pasuk, and so Rabbi Rakowski was answering me, and as he was answering me, Rav Shor walked by. And that was my first glimpse of a real Malchemet HaTorah. They went to war with each other, obviously respectfully, obviously kindly, and with emotion, and with their full breadth of Torah knowledge. They were, by the way, very, very different people. They were blessed with different characteristics, which is something we might talk about later on as well. Regarding Yaakov and Eisav, but certainly Rav Rakowski and Rav Shor are very different people. And when, especially in regards to this pasuk, regarding how Rav Hirsch could say what he says, whether it's something you can say, Rav Rakowski and Rav Shor went at it. So it was in my mind, this is a very fundamental, very important Rav Hirsch, not just for the controversy of it, but also because you can say, you are allowed to say that a particular commentary seems wrong to you if you are knowledgeable enough. So Rav Shor and Rav Rakowski had a big argument about this particular Rav Hirsch. Let's see what Rav Hirsch says. So first the pasuk. The pasuk talks about Yaakov and Eisav, who've gone, were a little past their birth. And it says, Vigbilu Hanarim, the children grew up, the boys, Yaakov and Eisav grew up, but Eisav ish yodei tzayid, Eisav became a man who knew how to hunt, ish sadeh, he was a man of the field, Yaakov ish tam yoshev ohalim, and Yaakov was a simple man, this translation says mild man, yoshev ohalim, who sat in tents. So to sit in tents doesn't mean he was just like wasting his time away. Usually, an ohel is symbolic of learning Torah. That's what we think of Yaakov. When we think of Yaakov, we think of somebody who sat and learned Torah as much as he could, more than the average person. So that's what he was doing primarily. Whereas Eisav went out into the field. All right. The Rav Hirsch says, our sages never hesitate to point out to us the errors and shortcomings, both great and small, of our forefathers, and precisely thus they make Torah great and glorious, heightening its instructiveness for us. In other words, he references here a commentary he makes earlier on in the Torah, and the point is that Chazal, indeed, in the Midrash and in the Gemara, sometimes say that the forefathers made a mistake here or there. They're not perfect people. We don't believe in perfect people. There is nobody who has never sinned. Everybody makes mistakes, and that's actually what makes us great as people, is that we have the ability and we should bounce back from making a mistake, and that allows us to grow. As a Talmudic phrase is a yerida letzarech aliyah. We go down sometimes in order to have the then wherewithal to bump ourselves up. So all of the avot, all of the forefathers made mistakes. Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov all made mistakes, and the rabbis point these out. What's interesting here's the controversial part. What Rav Hirsch is about to say is not something that the rabbis said in the Midrash, but he says that because the rabbis can criticize the avot in the Midrash and in the Gemara, therefore other scholars later on, including himself, now have the right to also criticize the avot in things that were not mentioned in the Talmud and in the Midrash. Can we, simple us, I'm not saying we're scholars on the caliber of Rav Hirsch. Rav Hirsch is saying, can we criticize the avot? So Rav Hirsch says yes. And this is what the big argument was between Rabbi Rakowski and Rav Shor, how we hold, whether we can criticize the avot. And can we criticize Rav Hirsch? So here's our comment, here's Rav Hirsch's comment on Yitzchak. On our verse 2, an observation made by our sages indicates the sharp contrast between the two grandsons of Avraham was caused not only by their natural tendencies, but also by mistakes in their upbringing. As long as they were little, no one paid attention to the differences in their hidden natures. They were given the same upbringing and the same education. Their parents overlooked the cardinal principle of Chanoch lenar al pi darko. Bring up each child in accordance with his own way, in accordance to how each individual child needs to learn. That's how you teach. That's how we teach our children. Each child needs to have an individualized, to borrow a phrase from special education, an IEP, an individualized education program. Every child doesn't have to be special ed. Every child deserves special ed. Every child deserves to have an individual program. That's why smaller classroom sizes are so beneficial, et cetera, et cetera. We're not going to get into all that right now. That's my ideas of education from being involved in it might not be popular with most people. I'm not going to go there now. All right. Each child should be guided in accordance with the path intended, especially for him or her. The path that suits the qualities and tendencies latent in the depths of his personality, and thus he should be educated both as a man and as a Jew. The great Jewish task is basically one, but the ways of its fulfillment are manifold and diverse, as human nature, human character traits, and paths of life are manifold and diverse. When the sons of Yaakov, here he's getting to the point, when the sons of Yaakov gathered to hear their father's blessing, and he visualized in them the future tribes of Israel, he saw not only Kohanim and teachers of the law, standing around him were the tribes of Leviim, the tribe of kingship, the tribe of merchants, the tribe of farmers, the tribe of warriors. Standing before his eyes was the whole nation with all its manifold characteristics and diverse ways of development. And he blessed all of them, each according to his own special qualities. For the covenant that God established with Abraham is intended for a healthy, whole, and vital nation. In other words, everybody in Israel, every single Jew has a unique task, and each one deserves a blessing. Not all of us were meant to be scholars. Not all of us were meant to be teachers. Not all of us were meant to be mechanics. But one of us, or some of us were. And in that person, each of us deserves a blessing to be the best of what we can be. The purpose of the covenant is to build a complete nation with all its manifold forms, all for the one great task, Lishmor, Derech Hashem, Tzedakot Mishpat. In other words, we are all together supposed to guard the way of Hashem and do tzedek and mishpat. We're supposed to do righteousness and law and kindness. Their strength and courage, no less than thought and emotion, are to have their champions in the service of God, and all the people in various callings are to fulfill the one great common task. Precisely for this reason, each child must be brought up al pi darko. Each child will then, obviously he's saying, has to be educated in their proper way. Not every child is meant for college. Not every child is meant for yeshiva. Not every child is meant for trade school. Different children, depending on what they are good at, depending on where their character leads them, that's how they should be educated. So each child, I'll be able to educate him to the one great goal according to his own unique way, in keeping with his potential. To attempt to educate a Yaakov and an Eisav together in the same classroom, in the same routines, and in the same manner, to raise both of them for a life of study and contemplation, will inevitably mean to ruin one of the two. A Yaakov will draw from the well of wisdom with ever-increasing interest and desire, whereas an Eisav will hardly be able to wait for the day when he can throw away the old books and together with them a great life mission of which he was taught in a one-sided manner, totally unappealing to his nature. He's an Ish Sadeh. He wants to go out. He wants to hunt. And there's nothing wrong with that. We need hunters. Had Yitzchak and Rivka delved deeply into Esav's nature, had they asked themselves at an early stage, how even an Eisav with the strength, skills, and courage latent within him could be harnessed for God's service, then the future Gibor would not have become a Gibor Tzayid, but a true Gibor Lifnei Hashem. He had strengths, and those strengths were used for the field, for hunting, and eventually for killing, and not good killing. If you would have been trained earlier, that strength could have been used for Hashem. Yaakov and Eisav, despite their different natures, would have remained twin brothers in spirit and in way of life. Early on, the sword of Eisav would have entered into a covenant with the spirit of Yaakov, and who knows what turn world history would have taken. But this did not happen. Only after the boys had grown into men was everyone surprised to discover that the two brothers from the same womb, who had been given the same care, the same upbringing, and the same schooling, were so different in their natures and actions. And he continues. He gives another reason for why Eisav was different. On the next pasuk, he talks about another factor was that the fact that Yaakov and Rivka had different feelings for the boys. The pasuk says that, as we're going to see, that Yaakov loved Eisav and Rivka loved Yaakov. And Rav Hirsch has something to say about that. But this disagreement between the spouses, that also creates a very different family dynamic, which is very difficult for children to grow up in. And that's another reason for Eisav to grow up to be the Eisav that he became. In other words, let's not beat around the bush here. Rav Hirsch is blaming, at least partially, Eisav's bad behavior, not on his nature, but on the nurture, on the fact that Yaakov the Yitzchak and Rivka raised Yaakov and Eisav in such a way, basically a similar way, when they should not have been straight-jacketed together. They had to be trained differently. They had to be taught differently. And the fact that they didn't do that, says Rav Hirsch, is their fault that Eisav turned out the way he did, at least partially. And that's a controversy, but certainly for ourselves, the lesson we get out of this is that if we are parents, or if we were children, I think we're all children, or if we are grandparents, or if we want to be parents sometime soon in the future, whatever the case may be, this is a very, very important lesson for everybody. And also, by the way, again, I don't want to go on a tirade about this, but this is an important way that we can look at everybody in life. Somebody cuts you off in traffic. Right? One reaction is, this guy's a fool. This girl's a fool. They don't know how to drive. Another reaction is, they must be in a hurry somewhere, and they weren't taught patience. society, their parents, their peers. Somebody along the way did not teach this person patience, and that's why this person is the way that they are. In other words, always go back, always think this person's journey in life. We're not in their shoes. We don't know everything that they've gone through, and so it's important to remember that as we go through our daily routine. All right, as referenced earlier, the very next pasuk after Yaakov and Eisav grow up and turn to these different ways of living their lives. The very next pasuk says, "V'yehav Yitzchak et Eisav," and Yitzchak loved Eisav. By the way, interesting turn of phrase. V'yehav, says Rav Hirsch, is an indication that really Eisav sort of forced Yitzchak to love him. Why? Kitayed b'fiv. So usually that means, let's translate that at least literally. Literally it means he had game. In other words, he had hunted animals b'fiv, in his mouth. Who had game in his mouth? Was Eisav always walking around with a beef stick, or was Yitzchak walking around always chewing meat because he loved meat so much? He loved Eisav because Eisav was a great hunter and hunting was all he cared about. That's Yitzchak. That's one of our avot. Continuation of the pasuk says, "Rivka hevet et Yaakov," and Rivka loved Yaakov. And again, not v'yehav, or te'ahav, or whatever. It says, "Oh, Rivka ohevet et Yaakov." She loved him freely, says Rav Hirsch, completely without any kind of reservations and without any kind of force. There was no reason for this love. It was just love, the way we want, the way we think of love. So the next comment on this pasuk, and this is basically one way to understand the entire dichotomy, the whole contrast between Yaakov and Eisav, comes from Rav Gedalia Shor, my Rosh Yeshiva's father, or Gedaliahu. And to give you an introduction, because I did not give you the whole essay, it's basically an essay, and we're going to focus on just a few parts. Even though in the source sheet there's a lot, we're going to basically skip around a little bit. But just to give you an introduction from beforehand, he mentions that there's two different kinds of people in the world. The pasuk tells us, "Sur meira v'asei tov," so stay away from evil and do good. So says Rav Shor, and obviously he's basing this on other sources. There are two different kinds of people in the world. There are those people who are sur meira. They focus on staying away from evil. In other words, they are let's call it more introverted, right? For lack of a better word. In other words, they want to stay away from evil. How do you stay away from evil? Not literally, but sort of become a hermit, right? Stay away. Lock yourself up in a room, a little bit like the Vilna Gaon. He never went out into Vilna. He stayed in his room most of the time. And that's sur meira. Stay away from evil. You're not going to do any evil. Try to talk as little as possible. There's a better chance you won't say lashon hara. Stay in your room. There's a good chance you won't see bad things. That's sur meira. Stay away from evil. The other kind of person, call it more outgoing, if you will, is an asei tov. Wants to go out and do good, right? This is the kind of person who goes into Kiruv, into Jewish outreach. They might go into a small community where there is not an established Jewish community, and they might want to build something up from the ground up. They want to meet lots of people. They're always waving. They're always saying hello. They smile on their face all the time. That's an asei tov, right? Always looking for opportunities to do good. Asei tov, do good. Those are the two different people in the world. This can also be connected, according to the Arizal, to something we learned about in the very beginning of the creation of the world. It's called the tree of knowledge, Eitz Hadat, Tov Ra, right? So there, what we have is the tree. What was it? Was it Eitz Hadat? Was it a tree of knowledge, or was it Tov V'Ra, the tree of good and bad? So the Arizal says this is Kabbalistic concept. We're not going to get too much into it. Just so you know, that is knowledge, or call it philosophy, and Tov V'Ra is action, right? So there are two different people in the world. One is a kind of person sort of more introverted, more meditative, perhaps. And then there's a person who's a go-getter who goes out there and does things, and that's a Tov V'Ra, right? Action, a person of action. What kind of person? So asks Rav Shor, what kind of person were? What kind of persons were Eisav and Yaakov, right? Who were they? So when it says V'yahed Yitzchak et Eisav ki cite b'fiv, as our pasuk says. And by the way, what Rav Shor is going to do now is he's going to take this theme. He's going to explain the entire parsha this way. So we're going to get ahead of ourselves right now. Usually we try to go in order of psukim. Here we're going to jump around a little bit. The nature of the essay. I apologize, but it's worthwhile. I think it's basically the only way I think I can understand the difference between Yaakov and Eisav. And hopefully I'll be able to get that across. So Yitzchak et Eisav kitayed b'fiv. So he had meat in his mouth. Amru Chazal, right? So Chazal tell us, and this is of course Rashi brings this. The kol, this is a different thing. So kol min ohev et mino. Every single thing like something that is like it. Okay. In other words, the opposite of opposites attract. Similar things attract. People usually try to find, birds of a feather flock together, right? People like to find kindred spirits. And Yitzchak, who midat hagvura, as we mentioned in earlier classes, the three avot, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, represent three different kinds of serving Hashem, right? Three different ways. Avraham is chesed, and we say Yitzchak is gevura or yira, fear or strength, and then Yaakov is actually in the middle, taking a little bit from both, and he is sort of a confluence of the two. So he has both kindness and he has the strength. But before we get to Yaakov, back to the strength. Yitzchak hu midat hagvura kuvar biarno shegvura peruch b'kvishat hayetzer. What's gevura? The Mishnah tells us who is a gibor, somebody who pushes away the yetzer, right? Somebody who is strong enough to overcome their own inner self. Somebody who has that kind of self-control. That's real strength, right? Yetzer so pushes away evil. Ra Yitzchak ki Eisav muna harba ra. He saw in Eisav, Yitzchak, obviously, Yitzchak was not a fool. He must have seen that Eisav had this potential for a lot of evil. Aval ki tzayid b'fiv. He had this meat in his mouth, which is what? Perish Rashi haya miramhu b'dvarim kitzad masrim et hateven. So when they spoke, basically Eisav tried to fool Yaakov into thinking that he was thinking about Torah, and he would ask, how can you take maser? Now there's a 10% from straw. You don't have to take maser from straw. You shouldn't take maser from straw. You only take maser from food, and straw is not edible. So it was not a good question. But in the conversations, tzayid b'fiv, he confused him with these questions that were in his mouth, he with this Torah. So perishaya Eisav mira et simane tahara Shalol Yitzchak. He tried to attach himself. He tried to trick Yitzchak's tahara, his purity, into thinking that Eisav was interested in Torah and that sort of thing. He obviously knew that Eisav had evil in him. So as we said from the Arizal, now, Eisav had some kedusha. Everybody does. So Eisav had some kedusha, had some holiness. And so when he was speaking Torah, so even though it was a ridiculous question and totally nonsense, still he's speaking Torah, and Torah is holy. And Yitzchak felt that holiness that was coming from Eisav because he had it. He had some holiness. So he must have had some, he thought that obviously since he had some Torah, he must have some holiness as well. Yitzchak Eisav, he thought that Eisav would take on this role of having Gevurah, just like Rav said, that if he would have been trained correctly, he would have used that Gevurah, that strength, he would have used it for good. Similarly here, he would have Eisav, if Yitzchak focused on the fact that Eisav had this Gevurah, and maybe this Gevurah would help him fight this war against the evil inclination that everybody has. L'chein says this is really the point here. L'chein yahav Yitzchak Eisav, and that's why Yitzchak loved Eisav. Sharash yesh bo kedusha kitayed b'fiv. He had that holiness because he was talking Torah. L'chein ahev oto ki chashav she'avodato hu midat hadin. He thought that they had the same war. They were having this. They had the same midah. They were birds of a feather. They had the same ideas and the same interests, and that's what he thought. And that's exactly why Rav Shor continues and says that's why he wanted to give the blessing of all things. He wanted to give the blessing to Eisav. He knew that Yaakov was better. He knew that Yaakov would be a great person in the future. He was going to give this blessing to Eisav not because Eisav was better, but because he wanted Eisav. The blessings, as you will see when we get to the blessings were blessings of strength, of Gevurah. He wanted Eisav to use that Gevurah, but Rivka saw that would not be and was given actually a prophecy that this was not to be, and that indeed Yaakov was going to have to get Gevurah, and he was supposed to learn Gevurah, and then that blessings of the Gevurah, those blessings of strength, would attach themselves to Yaakov, and Yaakov would then be able to do great things with it. And this is a longer essay. I knew we wouldn't get through all of it together. It probably deserves a class all on its own, but I have it here for you in case you're interested in reading it and learning it on your own. This might be a good time if you have any questions about it. But actually, I just wanted to not end the class, but just the last paragraph that Rav Shor writes is a very beautiful paragraph. It answers a question that we're not asking in this week's class, but it answers the question anyway. A very famous question that we should have asked, perhaps, is why Yaakov is lying to get the Bechorah. Why is this okay? We don't usually lie. Lying in sheker is a bad thing. And we said just a few minutes ago that Yaakov's midah is emet, is truth. He's the true one, and he's the one lying to get this blessing. It doesn't sound right. Doesn't sound right at all. So that's why. So later on, when he walks in to get the blessing, and he tells his father says, "Who are you?" And he says, I am, Eisav is your firstborn. Anochi Eisav b'chorcha. So that could be translated as, I am Eisav, your firstborn. Rashi translates it differently. He says he was trying to sort of maneuver against lying, and he was in every opportunity. Rashi points out the Yaakov is not lying. He's trying to not lie, whatever. So Anochi, I am. Period. Eisav b'chorcha. Eisav is your firstborn. So that's an interesting way to read it, but that's not what Rav Shor is going to say. Rav Shor says here, Zesha Amar Yaakov liYitzchak. This is what Yaakov said. Anochi Eisav b'chorcha. Chazal, the rabbis Mefarshim Shelo Amar Kan Cheker. He did not say a lie here. Ella Shemechalkim b'dibur. He was actually splitting up his words. Anochi Yaakov. Maybe lach, I am Yaakov as I am. But Eisav hu b'chorcha, and Eisav is your firstborn. That's what Rashi says. Yesh lahavin achshav gam al pi pshuto shel mikra. We can even translate it now that we've learned this idea of how Yaakov and Eisav are different. In other words, Yaakov is this person who is not a person of gevura yet. So now let's see how that can fit into this phrase. In other words, this phrase of Anochi Eisav b'chorcha. Harehu achshav sheYaakov sheyesh leYaakov gam chelek ha'avoda shel Eisav. Now that Yaakov is going out into the world, right? Now that he's going to be an asay tov, and he's going to go out into this wearing this clothing, wearing this sheepskin, and going to his father to basically trick him into getting the blessing. Now that he's doing that, now that he's going out, he's coming out of the tent, as it were. Yeah. Yesh lahavin achshav gam al pish pshuto shel mikra she'achshav sheyesh liYaakov gam chelek avoda shel Eisav. Now that he has this avoda of Eisav, the task of the asay tov. Eisav. He is actually Eisav. So when he says, Anochi Eisav b'chorcha, I am Eisav, your firstborn, he's not lying. He is Eisav. He's taken on Eisav's role. So he is Eisav. V'shayach lo habrachot shel Eisav. And he is fitting now to receive those blessings of Eisav. Im kain, harei b'chelek ha'avoda hu Eisav ha'bechor shel Yitzchak. He has now become the Bechor. He has become that firstborn. Since he bought the firstborn rights anyway from Eisav, now he has become the firstborn of Eisav. Below Amar Sheker Klal. And he did not say a lie at all. All right. So before we get into the next pasuk, we're going to actually get into Yitzchak's life. Let's pause for a moment to see if there's any questions. We've done. We're about halfway through the class, a little more, and we haven't had any questions. We've said quite a bit about Yaakov and Eisav. Any questions so far? If not, we'll just go on. That's I have no problem with that, as long as you guys still hear me. Okay, very good. Baruch Hashem. All right. So next pasuk. Again, as I said. We're going to hear a little bit about Yitzchak's life, the most mysterious of the avot. We have hardly anything that we know about him from his life, aside from what we're about to see is his going around different parts of the Plishtim and digging up wells that his father had dug up that were then covered up by the Plishtim, and him trying to get those wells back. He did well. He did well for himself. So that's let's see how that works. Let's see what we're talking about here. So the pasuk says, "Vahi rav ba'aretz." There was a famine in the land. Milvad hara'av harishon, much more than beside that huge famine that we had before in the Torah, where Avraham was forced to leave Eretz Israel. Avraham, Yitzchak el Avimelech, Melech Plishtim Grara. So Yitzchak went to Avimelech, who was the king of the Plishtim, of the Philistines, in Grar. Love that name. All right, so that's where he goes. He goes to Avimelech. Could be the same Avimelech, the king of the Plishtim in the time of Avraham. Could be that Avimelech is just what they used to call their kings. The word Melech is in there. Avimelech. My father, the king, right? So maybe that's what they call their kings. But the Ramban has a very, very important Ramban, and I'm sorry we're sort of running so late. We're just going to skim around to some important parts here. So the Ramban wants to know, why does Yitzchak have to go sojourn among the Plishtim? What's the message? What's the takeaway here? So the Ramban throughout the Torah talks about this very important concept, especially in Bereshit. He mentions this in his introduction to Bereshit as well. Maseh avot siman lebanim. So the actions of the avot, of the forefathers, is a siman, or basically a foretelling of what will be for their children. And so what he learns from Yitzchak's sojourn amongst the Plishtim and him having to leave the land, the Holy Land, he says is actually a reference, is a foretelling of what will be to the Jewish people when they are in Galut Bavel. That's what he says here. Let's skip around. So it says here, the fact that he had to leave, and the fact that this is so he says Yirmoz legalut kigala bimkomo bal korcha. The fact that he had to go by force out of his land, out of his where he was living. He didn't leave Eretz Israel, but he was comfortable where he was in Beersheba, and then he had to go to live amongst the Plishtim. No, not Beersheba. So halach el Eretz Acher, he had to go to a different land. So what does that hint to? Let's skip to this next underlying part. V'chein galut Bavel galu sham mipnei zafut harav. Zafut ra'av. So the fact is, during Galut Bavel, also the Jewish people had to move around because of the fear that they had of starvation, of famine. So also they had to move around. They had to go to Bavel. And there are a lot of other references, a lot of other hints, but this is one of the first places where he mentions this idea very explicitly, that everything that happens, all the travels of Avraham, he said it's pretty much the same thing, that all of the things that happen to the Avot is going to repeat itself in history. See, we have in Judaism and amongst other philosophical ideas, one of the things we think about is that history is cyclical. It's not, as we usually learn in school, a straight line, a timeline. It's a timeline that bends and it goes around, right? Like a snail shell. And if you plot dots along the line in that cycle, you'll see that different things keep repeating. There's certain things that keep repeating over and over again. Certainly in the lives of the Avot, that certainly gets repeated in the history of their people, the history of the Jewish people, the sons of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. All right, so we're going to have one more Ramban right now. Again, I leave it up here for you. There's Hebrew and there's English here for you, so you can reference this sheet later on if you're interested, and I hope you are. All right, we have 15 minutes left, and we're going to power through this. Egev al asher shemai Avraham. So Shem, yeah. So let me give you an introduction. What are we talking about here? So after Yitzchak is going through the Plishtim and he's not having an easy time there, Hashem appears to him and tells him, "Don't go down to all the way down to Egypt as your father did, because you, for whatever reason." And we've talked about earlier how he was so special because he was raised up to be a korban. He was on the level of being a korban, a sacrifice. And a sacrifice should not leave its holy state. And if he leaves the holy land of Israel, that would be a big problem for the level of holiness that he was in. Therefore, he should not leave. Let's continue. So part of the conversation, part of the vision that he sees of Hashem is Hashem tells him that he is blessed and he is going to be the progenitor of a great nation as well, because of the fact that he comes from Avraham, and Avraham was so great. How great was Avraham? Kev asher shama Avraham b'koli v'yishmor yishmarti mitzvotai chukotai v'torotai. That's the end of the first Aliyah. So because of how great Avraham was, and he listened to my voice, and he listened to my teachings, and he did my mitzvot, and he followed my laws, and he followed my Torah. Right? He did what? If he followed my Torah, he followed my laws, because there's laws in the Torah, aren't there? If he followed the Torah, then he kept mitzvot, because mitzvot are in the Torah. If he did what you want him to do, he followed the Torah, because the Torah is what tells us what to do. Hashem, make up your mind. What is it that Abraham did? So Rashi gives us an idea, and I have the Rashi there in full. But the Ramban is going to quote this Rashi and ask questions about it. In particular, the Ramban is bothered by the fact that so let's just go through this Rashi real quick. We're going to say it out. We're not going to read word for word. Basically, what does it mean? He listened to Hashem's voice. It means when Avraham was tested, and Avraham had 10 major tests, and he passed all those tests. Right? That's how he listened to my voice. What does it mean? He guarded my guardings. It means he made sure he followed rabbinic laws that are additions to the Torah, not really additions to the Torah, but ways to protect the Torah's laws. They siyag the Torah. They are fences for the Torah to protect the Torah's laws. To protect Jews from sinning. The rabbis came up with other commandments besides the mitzvot. So what are the mitzvot that Avraham kept? These are things that were not even written in the Torah. Right? We have certain commandments that weren't written in the Torah. They are halacha Moshe Sinai, and they're not in the Torah explicitly. And Avraham kept those as well. And then he kept the Chukotai. Those are translated here as ordinances. In other words, things that are difficult to keep, because we have a Yetzer Hara. Our natural inclination is to perhaps not listen to them, to eat certain things, to wear clothing, not to worry about shatnez. It doesn't seem like it's an important thing. It seems to be a chok. Doesn't have any particular meaning to you unless you learn about it. So it's not a natural, obvious rule that we have to keep. And yet Avraham kept those. And of course, Torah Tai, it's plural because he kept both the written Torah and the oral Torah, rabbinic law and the law of Hashem. So all of these are different categories. So it writes the Ramban. I'm going to skip to the underlined portion here. Yesh l'shol imkein ech hakim Yaakov b'matzeva. If it's true that Yaakov and all of the other avot kept all of the Torah, how come Yaakov made a matzeva? He made a kind of pillar that the Torah later on forbids. He married two sisters. We know that you're not allowed to marry two sisters according to Torah law. Yaakov does. That Rabbeinu Arba. So he really married four. All right. Anyway, so and Moshe made a matzeva. He also made this kind of pillar. Ve'ech efshar li'yu noagim b'ter haTorah b'ma she'asa Avraham Avinu al atzmo. So how come they're doing things that if Avraham kept all of the Torah, how come Moshe is making a matzeva? Yaakov is making matzevas. There's matzevas all left and right. So are they not keeping the Torah the way Avraham did? What's happening? How is that possible? So let's skip a bit. He strengthens his questions, and all good questions. Don't get me wrong, and I have the whole source here for you, underlined and ununderlined in English as well. Nira alai. So he says, you can answer these questions. Midat Rabbeinu Shalomad Avraham Avinu Torah Kula Baruch HaKodesh. How did Avraham get the Torah? Ruach HaKodesh. He didn't have a book in front of him that told him what to do and what not to do. It's not like he went to this class or to all of the other available classes to learn Torah. No, he learned it from Ruach HaKodesh. He had a unique spiritual sense of what he was supposed to do. But Asok Ba, Metame mitzvotah, he realized the reasons for the mitzvot. So the Techa, he realized the secrets. Every mitzvah has a secret to it as well. Secret doesn't mean don't tell anybody. Secret means there's Kabbalistic, deeper insights into each mitzvah that isn't necessarily the reason for the mitzvah, which is why the Torah, for example, the Gemara says a person shouldn't say the reason for chasing away the mother bird is to teach kindness. Yes, it does teach kindness, and yes, that could be a reason. It's not the reason. There's deeper reasons as well. There's deeper symbolic reasons, which I believe we talked about in the class we had on that parsha a few months ago. Okay, so really, also he kept the mitzvot in Eretz Yisrael, because only in Eretz Yisrael are the mitzvot for sure all obligatory. What do I mean by that? Aren't all mitzvot obligatory to everyone? So according to the Ramban and others, no. When you're doing mitzvot outside of Eretz Yisrael, and by the way, the Ramban lived most of his life outside of Eretz Yisrael and did all the mitzvot, as far as we know. I have no doubt about that. So when the Ramban says that the mitzvot were not as applicable, what he means to say is that the full power of each mitzvah is only really accomplished in the Holy Land. And according to him, and we're not going to get into that here, but he speaks about this more clearly in other places. He makes it very clear that his opinion is when you're doing mitzvot outside of Eretz Yisrael, you're really just practicing. Right? We're practicing Jews. Right? Really, the mitzvot are supposed to be actually acted out, and the intent is for them to be performed in Eretz Yisrael. Wow, we have not gotten very far into the parsha. So this is the rest of the Ramban, and I invite you to look at that when you get an opportunity. The next few psukim, I'll just say it out right here. So Avimelech goes to Yitzchak when he sees that Yitzchak is successful, and he wants to make a pact with him, just like he made a pact, or his ancestor made a pact with Avraham, whatever the case may be. And part of the reason that he claims that he wants to make this pact is because Yitzchak is blessed by God, and not only that, he says, we've been treating you nicely to begin with. How have we treated you nicely? Here's the interesting thing: we sent you out in peace. We kicked you out peacefully. So we've kicked you out peacefully. So that's how nice we are to you. Wait a minute. Let's remember. To us, it doesn't sound very nice, right? But Avimelech is using this as a proof, as a reason why Yitzchak should be nice to him, because he kicked him out nicely. So is he just not smart? Is he just doesn't not know what he's saying? Was this a faux pas? Was this a Freudian slip? What's going on? So for the answer, we'll go to our Gadol Hador of Chaim Kanievsky Shlita and Tamei Dekrai. So he says there, again, we don't have time to go into it word for word, but he says there is, if somebody pushes away a tzaddik for no reason, so they've done something bad. But if they pushed away a tzaddik because there's oncoming traffic or somebody was about to mug him, and he pushed him out of the way and saved his life, so he's doing a good thing. But what he's saying is that what Avimelech was saying was this was his way of really rescuing Yitzchak from something worse, from his terrible society that was under the protection of under the monarchy of Avimelech. He can't really protect him while he's there. What he can do is he can kick him out. If you have a kid who's being bullied in a classroom, sometimes the best thing for the teacher to do is to kick out the kid who's being bullied. I mean, obviously with some discussion, and this is not the place for a whole discussion of bullying. Obviously, it's wrong, and the perpetrator should be punished. But part of the saving of this child is to split them up from being bullied, to save them, rescue them. Keep them in the same situation, allow it to happen, keep happening over and over and over again, is not good for anybody. So that's the lesson there. All right, let's get right into the blessings. We're probably not going to have time for all of this. Well, I can for sure tell you we have 2 minutes. I can tell you one thing. Let's just go in order. Let's see. Let's read this beautiful sforno on why it is that Yaakov asks for Eisav to prepare him some delicious food. Now, from Rav Shor's perspective, we already know the reason. The reason is because he wants Eisav to have this gevura, because he wants to be in touch with this strength of Eisav, because Eisav's strength is what he sees from himself in Eisav that's going to allow Eisav to be this great person. But the Sforno's perspective is different. He says, make for me nice dishes the way I like to eat, the way I like them, give them to me, and I'll eat them, and I'll really be able to really give you a real blessing straight from my soul. Right? Why does he want this food? So Ratza Metamim Kadesh Yitzchak B'kivud Av. He wants to give him the mitzvah of kibud av. Ubezeh tachul alav habracha. And only then will he be able to have this blessing. Only then will he be able to really to be a good receptacle. You can't just give a blessing. Blessings aren't just like gifts. This isn't the Oprah show. You get a blessing and you get a blessing, and you have to. A blessing has to be earned. A blessing has to be something that somebody is mikabel. It has to become a receptacle worthy of receiving blessing. So, according to Sforno, Eisav at this point was not worthy of receiving the blessing. And Yitzchak knew it. Yitzchak knew all along that Eisav wasn't really worthy of getting this blessing. So he wants him to have the mitzvah of kibud av, and this great big mitzvah of respecting your parents, of doing something nice for Yitzchak in this case, giving him some delicious food, hunting for him this delicious food, which was not an easy task. That in and of itself, that's what would give Eisav the power to become this receptacle that will receive this blessing, that will be channeled through the words that Yitzchak will say to Eisav. And that's how blessing works, and we've talked about that before. And of course, we have more to say on that topic, and that's this big malbim that we were going to learn, which again is all about how a blessing works. And obviously, the Barbanel answers the next question that we have of why doesn't he then take back the bracha? He gave the wrong bracha to Yaakov. Take it back. No, you can't take it back, because that's not how blessings work. Blessings open up a channel of this beautiful radiance of blessing that comes from Hashem. Once you open up that channel, the blessing comes through. You can't send it back. It's a one-way ticket, one-way ride going down this. You climb steps, you go down the slide. This slide of blessing, it was already given, and therefore it was what it was, and you can't change it from that point. So that's what I have from you. And if you have any questions, this is a good time to ask. We'll have to learn more of the Parsha, God willing, next year, which is a good thing. Any questions?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming. All right. Oh, next week's class, Monday class. I always I like for everybody to know what the next week's class is going to be. Next week's class is a class I've given before, but it'll be a little more. It'll be a little different, especially here with Zoom. It's a class on Thanksgiving and the Jews. A lot of interesting questions. Is turkey kosher? I don't know. Is Thanksgiving kosher? Is it okay to eat a big meal on Thursday and then eat leftovers on Shabbat? A lot of questions. We'll see how that goes. All right, meanwhile, Good night, everybody. Be well. Enjoy.
Sounds interesting.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Good night.
Good night. Take care. All right.